In his final press conference of the year, President Obama reaffirmed his vow to defeat ISIS. He also urged Americans to stay vigilant in the wake of the San Bernardino terror attack.
ISIS and the war in Syria were a key part of the president's statement, but he also discussed the achievements of the past year and his relationship with Congress.
I will say that in his interactions with me, he has been professional. He has reached out to tell me what he can do and what he cannot do. I think it's a good working relationship. We recognize that we disagree on a whole bunch of other stuff and have fundamentally different visions for where we want to move the country. But perhaps because even before he was elected, he had worked on Capitol Hill, I think he is respectful of the process and respectful of how legislation works. So.
After the press conference, we are joined by CBS News State Department correspondent Margaret Brennan and Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett, who recap the achievements the president mentioned.
The president does feel that the economy is in a better place than he expected it to be and that many Americans expected it to be at the end of this year. Growth is solid, though not fantastic. Wages are moving up. They haven't moved up as rapidly as some in the markets would prefer, but they have moved up. And unemployment rate is at near historic lows, and the Federal Reserve has, for the first time since the Great Recession, raised interest rates, indicating it also believes not only the fundamentals of the economy are strong, but its trajectory in 2016 is strong. So that works for the president domestically. He also believes that the climate change agreement in Paris, as he said, is a reflection not only of the world's understanding of the threat of global climate change, but American leadership in setting the agenda, working on negotiation, persistently keeping open conversations with all the major players, China, India, and some of the emerging economies in South America, that this work could and did get done. And the president also has peace with Congress and a new speaker, Paul Ryan. And the budget deal that's just going through Congress now and the president will sign either today or tomorrow, the president got more than he expected to get. And Republicans, though they run House and the Senate, didn't get nearly as much as conservatives would have preferred. So on those measures and those measures alone, the president does believe he has emerged victorious. The president also said something about Guantanamo Bay and his intentions to try to close it in the next year, saying that he's going to try to reduce the population persistently and then present a plan to Congress. And then if Congress doesn't go along with it, he may use his executive authority. That could get him in some hot water with Congress because it's not just Republicans, but also Democrats who are skeptical of that plan. But you could see within that suggestion to Congress about a fight that's brewing, the president feels he has, if not the upper hand, at least some strong negotiating positions to carry forward to Congress. Lastly, I would say that I was a bit surprised, though I expected it before this press conference. There was very little talk of gun control in the context either of criminal justice reform, law enforcement, or counterterrorism, which indicates to me the White House has absorbed the message immediately after San Bernardino that now is not the time to try to move that agenda.
All right, we also want to bring in our correspondent, Margaret Brennan, who was in the White House briefing room listening to the president. Margaret, as Major just mentioned, the president was very complimentary of Congress. It's something we haven't heard throughout most of his presidency.
Well, the president was really trying to set what he hopes will be a productive 2016 and say, listen, I'm not a lame duck president just yet. I actually have some agenda items to get through. And he was giving himself some wiggle room there, really trying to start off on the right foot with the new speaker, Paul Ryan, who, as he said from this podium, he's had some ability to work with in the past. But what struck me about a lot of this press conference was very much a friendly tone to it. There wasn't a lot of combative questioning. There really wasn't the type of hyper-focus on the terror threat that you've heard the president message throughout the week. There wasn't a lot of newness that was laid out. A lot of this was very predictable. As Major Garrett said, the one surprise was really not highlighting more on gun control, which you had heard the White House lean into very strongly in the weeks leading up to and almost immediately after that horrific attack in San Bernardino. But the president's message was, I have more to get done in 2016, and let's look at some of the accomplishments I had in 2015.
You've been traveling with the president all year, and I just thought it was very interesting that you said that this was a very different president. What was the main takeaway for you after this speech?
Well, I think, the president was, as you said, relaxed. I think the fact that there was no combative give and take was also, in some ways, a choice here. None of the television reporters, the networks who've been very focused on the terror threat, were included or called on in that Q&A with the president, perhaps predictably because they'd go to what's showing up in the polls as really hurting the president's approval rating right now, which is this sort of anxiety about another San Bernardino. It surprised me that there weren't questions about what the president's message will be when he meets later today with the victims of San Bernardino, because that is so much front and center. One thing that I thought the president touched on very carefully, but is very immediate today and has been part of the immediate strategy against ISIS, is that question of whether or not Bashar al-Assad has to go for ISIL to be defeated, for ISIS to be defeated. And that is key because there is a major meeting happening in New York right now trying to map out a peace plan and a transition there. And the president didn't directly answer that question when it was very directly asked to him. And so you can see that there's still a little bit of a, we're not quite sure if the diplomatic gamble that we're betting on is going to pay off yet. But the president was leaning into the idea that he thinks they can at least get a diplomatic plan in place, whether or not it gets implemented, in terms of broadly winning that war against ISIS.